just preparing the live streaming, so 30 sec, and then we give you the floor, Ben.
Thank you.
There is a problem with the link. Okay, Ben, ready to start?
Ready to start?
Okay.
And thank you and good morning to everyone. And welcome here today to our launch of the State of Housing 2021. We are very proud to present this report. It's produced by our Housing Europe Observatory and led by Alice Bettini. And you will see her later presenting the main points in the reports. It has been a hard work, and I think it's really had given a good payoff, this hard work. And this report, I hope, will serve as a guiding compass to all of us. And especially now, it's very important now to exchange views, to exchange facts, and more important now than I will say ever before. We are in a very difficult period and also in a period where we can use some new opportunities. I would, of course, I think all of us will hope that we could meet in reality, and we will hope in half a year or so we can meet each other in the real world. But now we have to meet through a screen. We are used to it now, and we are together also, I think, in a common vision and in a shared vision that we have here, that we want inclusive cities, we want green cities, we want all of us to prevent homelessness, and we want an including labor market, and the main thing, we want decent housing for all in Europe. So we are together here, gathered in this common vision, which is very important for us. And we are facing now a challenge, a very big challenge, maybe the challenge for our generation, and it's the challenge of the climate. I think all of us, we have this feeling inside ourselves, it's now or never. We have to deal with it now, or as President von der Leyen said, we have to it's a make or break decade right now. And it's also a very important mission for the public and the cooperative and social housing sectors in Europe. And what is crucial here is that we all want the greening, but we also want that we do not price out people of the housing sector. The social dimension and the green dimension have to go hand in hand. And when we look at the COVID situation now, it has been like a magnifying glass for the situation in the housing sector and the situation about the inequalities. Some of the inequalities we all know in the housing sector, and one of the difficulties to have in inclusive cities and a more including labor markets, we have seen that much more clear now during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also see new functions of the local neighborhoods, because now it's not just, and it's not neighborhoods for housing and homes. It also has become, during this period, hubs for labor. We are working at home and we are studying at home. So there is also now where we see the inequalities when we have small homes and the possibilities to work at home and to study at home. And there will be a challenge and a change, I'm sure, in the way we have to deal with the local neighborhoods and the opportunities we have to make in the local neighborhoods. What we see in the housing sector, we see the economic challenges, like I said, in the magnifying glass. And we have the direct link in our housing sectors to people who has many of the challenges, who are outside the labor market, who deal with many of the problems because also of the COVID-19, but also because they dealt with them before that. And like I said, it's a kind of a magnifying glass. And therefore, the role of the EU now, it's very important to bring all together, and the views to boost investment and the greening and to tackle the housing exclusion. And we have to do this, to use these opportunities and see them to strengthen each other. And this dynamics at the EU level, when we look at the European Bauhaus, which is a very interesting initiative, the renovation wave, the affordable housing initiative, and all these things generate momentum that we have to use now and the next generation EU to create lasting changes. It's not just boosting the economy, which is very important, but also to have to create some structural changes and to have a lasting social and environmental effects, which is very important. We have the opportunities and we have to do it now because we have to combat all the many of the inequalities that we see right now through the COVID-19 magnifying glass. These initiatives and what we are seeing now, what we propose is also to have a kind of a European housing alliance, and to use this alliance to exchange our views and to look into a post-COVID-19 affordable housing strategies, which is very, very important. And also to create the innovative projects and also new finance, which is also a very important thing. What we have here in Housing Europe is a network of 43,000 local housing organizations. And what they are reporting back to us is that they see in the neighborhoods a growing inequalities. And what we have to do is to create neighborhoods more resilient, better to include, better to become local hubs of job creations. And we have to see these structural changes, which we see now because of COVID-19 in the labor market, as lasting things we have to change in the local neighborhoods, and to use them also to have people who has been outside the labor market for a long time to use this opportunity also to create a lower structural unemployment, because we can use the local neighborhoods as hubs for the growth. This is very important, to take the best of the challenges we see now, to take the best of the experience to create better cities, to create more inclusive cities in the longer run. In Housing Europe and Housing Europe members, what we have on a daily basis is a very close connection to the local communities. And this is what I'm talking about now. This is the new role of the neighborhood. These opportunities it can give to provide, to be the hubs of learning, and to be the hubs of commerce also, and to be the hubs of culture, and also be the hubs of a more inclusive labor market. What we want is, of course, inclusive and mixed cities. So let's work together, everybody, to create the next generation of neighborhoods, the new neighborhoods, the neighborhoods of mixed cities, have a vision where we can eradicate homelessness. We have the welfare states of Europe. We should be able to do that. And we have to use this opportunity right now, the crisis and the opportunity right now, to use the boosting of the European economy, the greening of the European economy, also to create a more social equal society. Now I would give the word and the floor to Alice Bettini, who will present the report, State of Housing report, for the next 20 minutes. And after that, there will be questions and a Mentimeter and a Q&A session. And all this will Sorka, our Secretary General, she will take us through that and through the round table discussion. So that was the words in the beginning from me, and I will give the floor to you, Alice.
Thank you very much, Bent, for setting the scene and for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today to present the results of a joint effort of Housing Europe together with its member organizations across Europe. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank the staff at the Secretariat, of course, but also all the members and national correspondents of Housing Europe who've been actively involved in the making of this report. Just one small housekeeping point before I start with my presentation. As Bent mentioned before, there will be a Q&A session at the end of my presentation, but all the participants are very welcome to already start using the chat, the Zoom chat, to post comments and questions directed to us. So let me start by giving a short overview of the content of what you will find in this 4th edition of the State of Housing report. A report that comes at a very critical time for Europe and the world, as we know. 1 year since the offset of the COVID-19 pandemic, that is really changing the way we live across Europe and the world, and also the way that we live in our homes. So first of all, in terms of content, like the previous editions, this report is a mix of looking at trends and evidence from the level of the countries analyzed, but also trying to draw some common conclusions and bringing in some evidence on the recent policy developments that are relevant to the sector. As usual, we will have some comparative chapters, but also a more in-depth view of 21 countries to the country profiles that actually represent probably the most interesting part of the report. As we know, the housing sector has a really big diversity across Europe, and this is an opportunity to learn more on what's happening at the national level. But what we try to do is also to draw some conclusions and try to understand what are the common points across the countries. And in particular, for this edition, what we wanted to do is to shed some light on the way housing conditions and housing needs are changing since the offset of the pandemic, and also, and more specifically, on the impact on the provision of public, cooperative, and social housing, and try to also look together at whether and to what extent housing policies at national level, but also European policies that interact with them, are up to the challenges ahead. As you can imagine, the situation is still evolving and changing every day, and there's also a huge diversity at the national level. But if we are to draw one common conclusion, we think that the key message from this report should be that even in a time of uncertainties as we're facing today, two things are really beyond doubt. That first of all, staying at home must be possible for all, and that the need for more social, adequate and affordable housing is already a reality, and one that is only likely to increase in the future. What we see is that the COVID-19 has made the vital role of adequate and affordable housing more explicit than ever. We have seen, for instance, evidence pointing at a clear link between housing inequality and health risk. For instance, just a small increase in the percentage of households with poor housing condition can lead to a much higher risk of COVID incidence and even mortality. Of course, we also see more in general that the housing conditions have a strong impact on the well-being and mental health of inhabitants, but also school performance of kids, and of course, the possibility to work from home, to work remotely. So, of course, given all these elements that have brought really to the spotlight the importance of housing conditions, probably more than ever before, we see also a corresponding increased attention to the issue of adequate and affordable housing, and also, in a way, other themes that go hand in hand with it, such as the issue of fuel poverty, of homelessness, really that led to a proliferation of very important, relevant reports and new literature over the past couple of years. Of course, what we have already highlighted in the previous editions of this report is that Europe was already facing a crisis in terms of housing affordability before the COVID-19 pandemic. The latest data from Eurostat that still refer to 2019, so pre-COVID times, showed that over 17% of the European population was living in overcrowded homes, that almost 10% of the overall population was facing housing costs that were too high compared to their incomes. And of course, this share was even much higher, over 35%, if we look at the share of the population living on lower incomes. Also interesting to point out, a much higher share of housing cost overburden rate in city compared to smaller towns or rural areas, and also the fact that tenants overall were almost 4 times as likely as homeowners to be affected by housing cost overburden. This situation was, of course, the result of a set of complex and different trends and dynamics. But one of the points that we wanted to highlight here is that housing markets have recovered from the global financial crisis. And what we've witnessed over the past 10 years, it's a continuous increase in house prices with an EU average of over 30% over the last decade. And although experts are foreseeing a potential decrease in house prices in the near future, what we see today is that actually house prices in most countries are still increasing at very fast pace. And the same goes for rents, although rents increases tend to be more concentrated, especially in cities and in high demand areas. So, of course, these trends come on top of a situation where the share of social housing has been decreasing over decades in most European countries, and policies have proven inadequate to face the challenges posed by the housing markets. Today, public, cooperative, and social housing providers are striving to supply new housing and renovate the existing stock through this particularly difficult phase. What we've seen from the feedback that we got from our members across the network is that, of course, the pandemic has had an impact in terms of housing supply and housing renovation. And this has hit the sector to a different extent in different countries. And although overall, what we see is that there has been an overall delay in housing supply, but overall not a huge difference in the numbers of new homes that were expected to compare to the ones that were actually delivered. In some countries, like for instance Italy, like for instance the UK, the long period of lockdown measures had a significant impact on overall construction and the supply of social housing in particular. Also, an important risk factor for the sector at the moment is the potential loss of rent revenue that represents a serious threat for the economic stability of the public, social and cooperative housing sector. Again, with respect to this phenomenon, what we've seen is that the actual rate of the actual loss of rent revenues hasn't been as great as was initially foreseen at the beginning of the pandemic. But overall, in some countries, this is already a reality. We see that, for instance, in France, the estimated amount of unpaid rents in the social housing sector is supposed to increase by 100 million euros because of the pandemic. We also see an increase by 30% in social housing rent arrears in the UK. And even in countries where this hasn't manifested yet, there is a fear that this might be the case in the near future. So what is the impact of the pandemic on housing needs and housing demand? What we see today is that if we look at the big picture, basically, economic forecasts point at an increasing poverty and inequality throughout Europe. This, according to expert organizations, will inevitably lead to a stronger demand for social and affordable housing, on top of what are already very large unmet needs, and at the same time, a diversification of demand. I just wanted to give you some examples of countries where we know already from figures, we get an idea of what are the consequences in terms of housing needs right after the pandemic. So council housing waiting lists in England already count more than 1 million households, but they could be set to nearly double to 2 million households next year. Also, and very interesting to look at what's happening in the overall housing market and the rental market in particular. And a recent study by Caritas shows that in Czechia, in 2020, over 1 in 4 tenants fear that they will have to leave their current home over the next 12 months due to loss of income linked to the economic consequences of the situation we're facing. And at the same time, for instance, in Italy, we find that the share of tenant households in the private rental market that have arrears on rent payments over just 1 year went from 10% to 24%. And a similar increase is also to be found in the number of homeowners with arrears on the mortgage payment. Also, the feedback that we got from the organizations, members of Housing Europe, clearly show that public, social and cooperative housing providers have mobilized to support residents and the communities where they work since the offset of the pandemic. They have done so, for instance, by preventing homelessness and promoting inclusion through adapting rent payments, deferring rent payments to accommodate for worsening economic conditions of their tenants' households, and also at the same time helping people to access the social support that was made available by emergency support schemes. Also, they have worked with partner organizations, with services providers, for instance, to provide mental health support, to prevent antisocial behavior, domestic abuse. And they have reached out, especially to the most vulnerable tenants, for instance, through phone and video calls, and set up as a consequence a number of services to help them, for instance, through drug delivery, of helping them doing the groceries, and so on. At the same time, there has been a clear push towards digitalization that, of course, has become more than ever important in the current context, with a number of services switching to online, and also, let's say, innovative actions such as the possibility to use virtual home tours and similar. At the same time, and also I think this will also be very important in the future, the situation has led to a serious debate within the sector about the quality and the design of the homes and neighborhoods where the social cooperative and public housing providers are working. For instance, the fact that people had to spend much more time at home has meant that having more space for kids to study, for adults to work, has become of vital importance. At the same time, having access to green areas, to services. For instance, the concept of the 15-minute city has become very popular and more than ever appealing. So this will inevitably lead to interesting changes in the future. The last part of my presentation, in terms of policy response, what we've seen is that most countries were fast actually in putting in place emergency measures that focused on supporting incomes and, for instance, temporarily banning evictions and helping people with difficulties paying the mortgage or the rents to defer payments and without incurring the risk of losing their home. All these measures have had a tremendous impact and were really important, but they were planned to be temporary measures, and some of them have already started to be phased out, others will come to an end soon. So what is also important at the moment, and also what a number of institutions call for, is that policies must make an effort to look at the longer term and move to a logic of sustained reinvestment in social, public and affordable housing. And what we see is that although there are some encouraging realities at the national level, this is not yet a sustained trend across Europe. Also very interesting, and we see the clear interaction between European and national policies more and more. For instance, many countries currently foresee investment in housing, and especially housing renovation, in their national recovery plans. We just wanted to mention some example here with France investing a significant amount of the France Relance plan into renovation of social housing. Similar interesting programs are planned for Italy, Portugal, Spain, and this is absolutely not an exhaustive list. There are other very interesting cases across Europe. So this was just to introduce the importance of checking this interaction between national level and European policies and trying to understand together what Europe is already doing and what more can be done to support the much needed investment in affordable and social housing that we see across the countries that we've analyzed in this study. So I will conclude here my presentation for the time being, and we will have, as mentioned, a short Mentimeter section, and then we will start with a Q&A session. So I leave the floor to my colleague Diana.
Thank you very much, Alice, and hello also from me. It is nice to see you. And we thought that for sure there will be a lot of questions, so you can already start thinking about that and type them in the chat by saying who you are and where you come from, and if you have a specific question to Alice or maybe in generally to the audience. But we thought that why not first try to look at what the 120 participants at the moment think about the different aspects from the report. So I'll just share my screen. All right. So now you should be able to see it, and that's maybe a little reminder that, well, we are of course speaking together on Zoom, but there is also kind of a parallel discussion that exists on Twitter. So feel free to join it there. The hashtag is the same as the title of the report, State of Housing. So looking forward to talk to you there as well. And if we go to our first question, well, first, before we do that, you need to go to menti.com. Basically, the tool works with any kind of device that can be on desktop, mobile, tablet, etc. And then you need to go and type the code 67 41 46 50. Now just allow a few minutes so that you can connect. Okay, I see that people are starting already to vote. So in the meantime, I'll read the question, although I see already 4 people are starting. So many of us are in a home office, and now that we are almost in a third wave of the COVID pandemic all over Europe. So tick the box if you feel warm enough at the moment. Still not very sunny in Brussels, I must say. Whether you have the chance to work in a separate room or you're sharing a kitchen table with your partner, keep the light on. We've noticed that many households, unfortunately, sometimes live in very dark, inadequate housing. So they would need to either have the light on all day, making them feel quite tired. And also, I see that for the moment, around 1/3 of our participants have a garden or a balcony, and we have really realized how important that is. And the report mentions on several points that this is actually one of the takeaways on what adequate housing actually means. So I must say that I was actually expecting even higher numbers for our panel today, but we definitely see that even here, very often maybe we would say that we have some privileges being here, working and being connected, but we already see that even within our audience, 38 people, we never reach basically more than 1/3 on any of these different aspects, which I personally think that it's quite worrying. Okay, I see that we have 40. I would just allow it a few more seconds, but I see that the numbers are definitely not very high, and that's alarming. And I just not to waste time also for the Q&A session, I'll move to the next question so that we continue. And this is something that you maybe quickly heard from my colleague Alice, and that is about house prices. The question is, over the past decade, house prices have increased quite dramatically. Was that 9.3%, 15.5%, 30.2%, or over 50%? That is not the goal here is not to have a test and to see whether people have listened carefully, but it's really actually to emphasize on a key figure that we should pay attention to and look at financialization in general. Maybe while people are voting, it's good also to mention that speaking about financialization and financing and house prices, there is a Housing 2030 event happening on the 14th of April, and a key initiative where we work together with UNICE and UN Habitat. So you'll receive an invite very soon, early next week on that. But indeed, I think we keep it around 40 people voting with that too. So we see 78% voting for plus 30. Well, indeed, this is also the correct answer. If we move ahead, then we also have, we move towards Italy, a little bit more on the south. And the question is, in Italy, the share of households with arrears on rent in the private sector has jumped from 10 to 7, 10, 19, or 24%. Okay, we see 24 and 19, but I'll allow a few more minutes. Well, as Alice mentioned, we have 21 country profiles covered, so it's of course very difficult to do that in a short presentation or in a very short Mentimeter. But I would very much recommend you to go through the report on stateofhousing.eu. You can also connect to it directly from our Housing Europe website. And have a look at the different countries and how they have been doing. And you'll see some other, actually sometimes disturbing numbers on all of them. And indeed, In Italy, 1/4 of the residents have not been able actually to pay their rent on time. Okay, and that is the correct answer. And I think this is the last one before we move to the actual Q&A session. A little bit particular question, but we wanted to emphasize something here. Well, where we see that prices are going up, we also see that there is actually a lack of affordable social housing. And just to give you the example of France, there is a quite high, really think of a high number of pending applications for social housing. So looking forward to see what is your guess. Maybe some people will guess that if they're really working on housing every day, but many might be surprised. Okay, so I see around 1 million. I think it's very often repeating. We have 4.6 million. Sorry, I see here euro. It is important to mention that we are speaking of number of applications, not the actual cost. 1.5, 2 million. Luckily, it is not 4.6 million, so that is something that is good to mention. Okay. Public funds, 1.5, 3 million. Okay, it is a hard question, I guess, to guess. Although I see some correct answers, I would just allow a few more seconds so that we have some time to move to the Q&A session. Okay, I think I'll stop it here, but indeed I see a correct guess, and it's indeed 2 million. So thank you very much for let's say playing the game, although on a not very positive numbers and questions, but I'll be back after the panel, and there we have something to end up on a high note with. So thank you very much, and looking forward to hear also from you at #StateOfHousing. Thank you.
So we're now starting a short Q&A session. I think many of you have already posted interesting questions in the chat. So I would ask my colleague, Julien Dijol.
Yes, so
give me a hand with the questions, Julien.
Yes, hello everyone, hello Alice. So as I was indeed looking at the chat, there was the already interesting conversation within the participants, among the participants. First conversation around the type of structural changes that the COVID brought to the new design for social housing. Jost from EFL has asked this question, and we have already an answer from Belgium. This is indeed something that you pointed out in the report, more generally speaking, but this is probably rather a comment or questions to the housing providers who are participating to the chat. So feel free to continue the conversation within the chat. So we had also other questions. Not all of them are related to what you presented. So I suppose we also will reserve some of the questions for the panel discussion afterwards. For instance, Maria from Fienza was asking about the evidence about the rent control measures in European cities. I don't know to which extent the report address some of those points, Alice, according to you. And Maddalena from Italy was saying that the collective imagination tends to consider social housing as a second-class housing. How could we make social housing more appealing? Well, this is a very big question, but maybe we can reflect on what the reports show in terms of the work that the social housing providers have done, particularly in the pandemic. So, yeah, I would highlight these two questions: the one on rent control, whether we have some information about the impact, and the other is the perception of social housing, whether we have information on this kind of perception, but as a second-class housing, whether the pandemic, do you think it will change the perception in a positive way?
So for the first question, it's a very interesting, very timely issue. I know that rent control is typically the issue that tends to divide drastically among the economists and experts. You will always have those who are in favor and those who are against. It's not something that we, let's say, specifically touched upon with this report. But overall, what we've seen is that over the past few years, a number of especially big European cities that have seen a drastic increase in rents are trying indeed to come up with solutions that go in that direction. So far, I would say there is not much evidence around the success or not of these kind of measures, but I think it's a very interesting point, and you also have to keep in mind that from the perspective of the membership of Housing Europe, their sector is typically already highly regulated. It's one of the characteristics that distinguish social housing, affordable housing from other type of commercial developments, let's say. So I think it's important to consider, let's say, having a fairer level play field for the different actors in the housing market, also in terms of the rules that apply to rents. But it's not the only aspect. For instance, the rent regulation is typically something that is implemented at the local level, but there are many other things that local authorities can do. For instance, in the way they work on planning and on making sure that land should be available for affordable and social housing and not being completely taken over by commercial development. So I think it's a very interesting phenomenon to follow, but we don't yet have a clear answer on that.
Thank you. And in the meantime, I see some people putting some piece of research on the chat, particularly Julie Lawson. So I suppose that, yeah, there will be also other ways to get some information on that. Thank you, Alice. And so for the second point about, yeah, I mean, the perception and reputation of social housing, do you think, I mean, the pandemic has made some change, positive change on that?
Yes, I think, to be honest, that we see a stronger attention from the sector, but also from the point of view of policymakers to the importance of this element. So with regards to the design of the homes themselves, but also the neighborhoods, the social housing neighborhoods in overall. And for instance, I think the question was brought up by the Walloon colleagues. We've seen Wallonia as an interesting example in that the government has decided to invest for securitization, but also aesthetic improvement of public housing. And we hope to see other initiatives like that.
Thank you. I think, yeah, I think this is it. We need to move to the second part of our today's meeting, and I think we'll give the floor to Sorka Edwards, Secretary General of Housing Europe. Sorka, I think this is over to you. Sorka, do you hear me?
Thank you very much, Julien. We are just starting the video now. Oops. Get the positioning right. So I think we've had an excellent overview of the impact at local level and some of the key statistics coming through from national level. So now we come to the part where we discuss what are the most apt policies, what policies initiatives have been taken, what are those which are still on the cards. And for this, we will start, of course, with the representative of the presidency of the European Union. And for this, we are really honored to be joined today. We have the Minister responsible for infrastructure and housing from Portugal, who is going to join us to give us a overview of what has been achieved by the presidency and what the key steps going forward on the cards are. So I hope that we can now welcome Pedro Nuno Santos, Minister for Infrastructure and Housing.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation, for taking part in this session. It is both a pleasure and a great honor to be here with you today at the presentation of the report on the states of housing in Europe 2021. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the Housing Europe Network for the extraordinary work it has done in recent years. By gathering information across several countries, it creates the fundamental ground on which comparative studies can be built, which then help us to identify problems and design policy proposals to address housing issues. The context in which this fourth edition of the Housing Europe report is published is, of course, a very particular one. All across Europe, the pandemic has made the weakness and vulnerabilities of housing systems painfully clear. At a time when citizens were asked to stay at home, it became obvious that not everybody had similar housing conditions, that not everyone had what it takes to ensure their safety and well-being at home. The pandemic, as such, did not cause this very unjust situation, but its human consequences were dire, since it hit with disproportionate violence, with a higher number of cases and higher mortality, the poorest families, those who live in overcrowded houses or without proper shelter. The housing crisis we are currently experiencing is itself not new. It is the result of a long trajectory which the 2008 financial crisis made worse by creating an ever larger gap between household incomes and housing costs, both for buying and for renting, as the report we are here gathered to present so clearly shows. Through this very period, all across Europe, states have been cutting down on public investment and on the social promotion of affordable housing. It is time that universal access to proper shelter is once again seen as a fundamental right, as crucial and as indispensable as the right to education and to health. This requires that both the states at an individual level and the European Union as a whole actively work to promote the right to housing, either by their own direct initiative or in partnership with civil society actors such as housing cooperatives. Over the past 2 decades, it has too often been assumed that the market, left to its own devices, would be able to sort out people's housing needs. Even in countries with structural housing shortages, as it is unfortunately the case with Portugal, absolute priority was given to facilitating home ownership through cheap credit, on the assumption that competition in the free market will be enough to sort out people's housing needs. If there is one thing the pandemic has made plain, it is that the free market creates sharp inequalities, and it cannot on its own satisfy people's fundamental right to adequate shelter. The proposals contained in this 2021 edition of the State of Housing are therefore of the utmost importance. And it is not enough for each member state to take upon itself the task of regulating housing markets and promoting adequate housing to its population. It is equally crucial that European budgetary rules and macroeconomic orientations allow for these efforts to succeed. It is furthermore essential that the European Union itself creates financial support instruments, enabling the member states to develop policies that reinforce the public and social supply of housing. The proposals contained in this report are thus very welcome and indeed vital. They are geared towards increasing public and social investment in affordable housing. For instance, by reducing the share of individual states' participation in community funds for the sector. Similarly, The report makes a crucial call for revising the principle of state aid in the promotion of public housing and for keeping the investment clause in Stability and Growth Pact. Last but not least, the report calls for widespread support for improving energy efficiency and environmental sustainability of residential buildings, which is a crucial component of the climate transition we need to be working towards. Within the framework of the Portuguese presidency of the European Union, the Portuguese government is committed to doing everything within its powers to make sure these proposals and guidelines become reality. It should also be stressed that the recommendations made in this report are perfectly in tune with the European Pillar of Social Rights, which is also taking its initial steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this excellent overview, and we welcome the fact that you recognize the need for those policy recommendations that have been outlined on the basis of that evidence coming through. And of course, very much welcome the general support that the EU presidency has showed for this important issue, that is the lack of adequate affordable housing and growing homelessness across the EU. So I hope you can join us for a little bit longer, Minister. What we will do is work to put together a little bit the puzzle that is housing when it comes to EU level. So as we know, this is clearly a local issue, a national issue, but there is clearly also need for a definite boost and a more coherence when it comes to housing at European level. And I think the efforts made by Portugal as holding the presidency of the European Union are extremely welcome and extremely important for citizens when we consider the statistics that Alice has outlined of the growing issues on the ground. So I'd like to move to now to look at another of our extremely important institutions in this role, and that is the European Parliament. We can see that there is a growing number of members of the European Parliament who have seen that indeed that this issue, which is on the minds of citizens, needs to be brought to the highest level. And in that regard, we are really happy that Kim van Sparentak, who has been working very hard on this issue over the last year, and has managed to get the approval of an extremely important report on the importance of affordable access for all. So hopefully, Kim, that you've managed to join us. Great to see you. And please just give us some your reactions to the state of housing, maybe an overview of the actions that you have managed to take, and the report, key points from the report that has received the approval of the entire Parliament. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, thank you so much, Urke, for and thanks also to Housing Europe for inviting me to be on the panel today, and also for the great research work you have done with the State of Housing 2021. So as rapporteur for the European Parliament report on access to decent and affordable housing that was adopted in January, the collaboration with Housing Europe has really been crucial. And I think that we can really say that housing has, become one very important topic on the European level, even though still a lot of people are really happy to say there is no European competence, so we don't have to talk about it. And I'm also incredibly pleased to see that Portugal and the Portuguese presidency has put this so high on the agenda, because there is a housing crisis. There was already a housing crisis before the pandemic, and we all know and see that it's getting worse. The solid research work that was presented today will really help my work in the European Parliament to keep pushing for solutions to the housing crisis. I think the housing affordability crisis keeps getting worse, and you also see that the rise in housing prices is not at all impacted by the virus. In the Netherlands, housing prices in February this year had increased with 10% compared to 1 year before, and this is the highest increase in 20 years. And we see that Blackstone has raised 10 billion euros for a specific investment fund in European residential real estate. So we have done a lot of work, in the past year on the report and in general. But I'm very happy also to reflect on, what's my takeaways are from the report. And the first element I would like to react to is the fact that the COVID crisis has put the importance of quality housing for the health and well-being of people in the spotlight. You know, the correlation between overcrowded housing and the COVID mortality risk is simply staggering. Without a doubt, there's also an interplay between other risk factors and vulnerabilities, such as low income and poverty, and that have been proven to be risk factors for COVID as well. Quality of housing has several elements to it. Adequate space, indoor air quality, energy performance, noise levels. The pandemic has in particular highlighted the importance of the outdoor environment. People that were suddenly working, studying, video conferencing from a small apartment, they needed breathing space. And rather than criticizing too many people gathering in city parks, perhaps we should reconsider if we have enough parks. In cities, everyone should have access to a park or green space within 500 meters. A small patch of private outdoor space, like a terrace, can also make a huge difference. Public, social, and cooperative housing providers should take this into account when planning or renewing neighborhoods, and they really need to get the necessary financial support for this. A second issue I would like to discuss is the need for more public investment. A call for more public investment in a report from the social housing sector can hardly be a surprise for any policymaker, but it is so evident that this is needed, and I'm glad that the call was also supported by a majority of the European Parliament in the report. In the last decade, the share of social and public housing has dropped in most European countries, and the investment gap stands at 57 billion euros per year. The report points out that we're not seeing a major shift from the direct housing emergency measures because of COVID to longer term efforts to higher investment in social and affordable housing. Member states need to step up, and the EU needs to support this. And that is why it is of crucial importance that the European Commission follows up on the call of the European Parliament to develop an integrated EU-level strategy for social, public, and affordable housing. Investment in affordable, social, and energy-efficient housing should be a priority for the Next Generation EU initiative. And we see some national plans are taking investment in social housing on board, but the Commission should push for more through the evaluation of the plans. The EU's new fiscal rulebook that should see the light in the coming year should also create space for more public investments once the general escape clause is lifted, and the European semester should set affordable housing as an important policy goal and not only look at the development of housing prices as a macroeconomic risk factor. And finally, I would like to discuss the issue of housing renovation. We know massively investing in housing renovation is good for the climate and jobs, but it also can get people out of energy poverty and into decent homes by focusing efforts on social housing and on the least energy efficient houses. The report points out that the high energy bills become even a bigger problem when you have to stay at home all the time. I think the Affordable Housing Initiative will be important to develop new approaches that can bring the cost of renovation down and increase the rate, recognizing that the challenges and solutions are different across Europe because housing and energy systems are different. A deep renovation of 3% of the European building stock per year, improving the energy performance of these buildings by at least 60%, can create 2 million jobs. This should be prioritized in the economic recovery and is a good example of what a just transition to a climate neutral society that leaves no one behind should look like. I'm very grateful that the report touches on the elephant in the room. Who will pay for all this? The report calculates that an additional 10 billion euros is needed to increase the renovation rate of the social housing sector to meet the ambition of climate neutrality in 2015. It's clear that the investment of the recovery fund will be an important element, and that private finance has a role to play as well, for which the green taxonomy will be an important instrument. I want to conclude by saying that we need a strong social, public, and cooperative housing sector in Europe to successfully tackle the housing crisis we're facing. Thank you.
A great conclusion there, Kim. So thank you very much. I think the role of the Parliament indeed in linking those very real concerns of citizens and to policymakers, I think you've really, with this report, you've really played that role to your maximum. And I think we really have to, as a community working for decent housing for all, really welcome that contribution. So we have heard now from the European Council, we have heard from the European Parliament, And I think very crucially, I will just make the hook to our next very welcome speaker by indeed pointing at the stress that Kim has put on the need for investment, both in new construction, but of course in this renovation wave. Indeed, the report has found that additional 10 million estimated to bring the social housing stock up to standard would be needed. And I think what is important to point out there is, as you mentioned, this will help to alleviate energy poverty, reduce fuel bills. It will also, in this way, bring more investment in the local economy, more economic activity as well. But of course, the investment will not be paid back directly often to those making the investment if you look at the social housing providers. So I think in this way, we need to look at that investment as something that will have a societal payback, and therefore see it indeed not as a debt or a cost or an unfair state aid, but really that as a social investment. And I think this is one of the challenges that we face, and that we are happy to work with European institutions on this. And so I'd like to extend a warm welcome now to Declan Costello, a Deputy Director General from the Directorate General for Economic and Financial Affairs. I'm sure these days are extremely busy for you, so we really welcome the fact that you were able to join us, Declan, and just give us perhaps some reactions to some of the findings of the report, and just an insight into the relevant actions that you're working on or that are in the pipeline for this field, relevant for this field. Thanks a lot, Declan. Hopefully the sound and all of that is working for you.
Yeah, thank you, Circa, for the invitation. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, great. So thank you for the invitation, also to Housing Europe, for the opportunity to speak. I mean, just maybe the first point I think to make is just to confirm from our economic analysis and forecasts that COVID has had a dramatic role in exacerbating what were already significant imbalances and problems in the housing sector in Europe. Now, we've been monitoring this and issuing recommendations on housing markets for some time in the context of the European semester, not only related to imbalances in housing markets, but more and more emphasizing the issue of affordability. Now, I think when one looks at the economic impact of COVID, what's perhaps more striking than the actual size of the economic shock is its differential impact. The burden of the impact has fallen much harder on young people and on groups in society which have less economic resources and more tenuous connections to the labor market. And I think also looking forward, and again, it's not just the Commission's work, but also of other international institutions, it's very much what we're looking at as a K-shaped recovery. Where some sectors of the economy and some groups in our societies stand to actually do rather well from this, whereas those with less income, as I say, less attachment to the labor market could struggle. And I think this is likely to exacerbate what were already problems in the housing markets, and particularly in the social housing sector. Now, maybe I can then just bring you up to date a little bit on some of the measures which were taken, and particularly the Recovery Resilience Facility. Now, we are in the midst of negotiating with the member states on the design of their recovery and resilience plans. We're very much now entering the final stage of those negotiations. I would say that maybe 20 or just over 20, for 20 member states, we actually are fairly advanced. We have a pretty good idea of the reforms and investments which they intend to include in their recovery resilience plans. There's maybe a few countries which are lagging a little bit behind. Our expectation is that hopefully in most cases, those countries will be able to submit final versions of their plans to the Commission by the end of April. What will then follow is a 2-month process of evaluation by the Commission, and hopefully we will be in a position to recommend approval of those plans. And that then in turn should lead to hopefully a relatively quick turnaround in the Council, leading to disbursements starting approximately a month later. So it's extremely intensive work. But our expectation is that the first approvals and some of the first disbursements could hopefully take place over summer, and then that can the level of those transfers can ratchet up in the second half of this year. So a very busy phase, but nonetheless, we're now talking about implementation of the plan, of the facility, and not its design. Just turning to the how to the extent to which the Recovery Resilience Facility will help address some of the challenges in the housing market. I think one of the important points to stress at a macro level is that the scale of these transfers are very, very significant in a number of member states. Now, if you take the largest transfers as a share of GDP, they would be in countries like Croatia, Greece, up to about 10 percentage points of GDP. But in many member states, the scale of the transfers, I'm talking grants now, so non-repayable, could be in the order of 4 percentage points of GDP. And this is actually quite critical because those transfers will be made over a relatively short period of time, 3 to 4 years. And the implication of this is that hopefully one should avoid a situation which we experienced in the global financial crash, is that member states, when faced with difficult fiscal situations, the first port of call when it came to finding fiscal savings was on the investment, was on the public investment budget and cutbacks in areas such as social housing. There is no reason for that now. We should actually hopefully be seeing an uptick in the amount of investment, public investment overall, and avoid, if you will, some of the downsides we saw from the global financial crash. I can't run through where we are country by country in the negotiation. We do see a fairly significant component or emphasis on housing and social housing. I would say it's broken down into sort of 3 main types of activities. One would be direct investments, increasing the supply of social housing. Secondly, direct efforts to increase the availability of housing for particular vulnerable groups. Now that could be migrants. In some countries, there's a focus on students. There's other vulnerable groups which are targeted. And finally, and possibly quite importantly, under the flagship of Renovate, there is a strong emphasis on the upgrading and renovation of social housing and public housing in general, to bring it up, to make it more energy efficient, which is of course good for our climate targets, but of course can also deal with issues of energy poverty. So there is quite a strong emphasis on this. Maybe also worth mentioning, it's not just the Recovery Resilience Facility which can help out in this. We also are in the process of operationalizing the Invest EU facility, which through the community budget, which would provide guarantees to financial institutions. This can lead to crowding in of private investment. There is a specific window under Invest EU on social investment and skills, where there's an allocation of guarantees of around 3 billion euros from the European budget, which hopefully could crowd in additional investment of approximately 30 billion euros. So it is very much, I think it's hopefully, as I say, underway. We hope that these funds, both InvestEU and Recovery Resilience Facility, can start to flow already in the next couple of months. I'll stop here, but would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Declan. Yes, I would encourage, indeed, that's really great if you can hang on. So questions are coming through, and my colleague Julian is managing those. Indeed, we are also pleased to say that it is also the recognition of the importance of the sector is very much on your radar, and the disruption that the pandemic has caused, and the potential resulting growing inequalities in the sector that will bring about. So it's always a good starting point to be sharing the same vision of the issues. We would like to then welcome one of your colleagues to give also her reaction to the report and a little bit her perspective from the sphere of work within DG Employment. I think Lucy is there. Hi, Lucy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation and for the report, a very good and interesting report. So indeed, as it was recalled quite eloquently by previous speakers, the crisis has further demonstrated the importance of a decent and the quality, adequate home for health and for well-being. And I think I can say that the Commission has early on recognized the importance of housing issues, both in macroeconomic terms, but also as a social issues. And just to illustrate this, I will recall that the European Pillar of Social Rights, which was adopted in 2017, dedicated one of its 20 principles to housing, and more recently, the action plan implementing the pillar is giving importance to housing issues and put forward a number of initiatives backed up by funding, and also put forward a social scoreboard. And in this social scoreboard, housing is quite prominent. Overburning, the cost, housing costs overburning is one of the headline indicators. Severe housing deprivation is also one of the indicators we will use in the future to monitor the social situation. And thanks to Eurostat, we know that 1 in 10 households in Europe is overburdened by housing costs, meaning that they spend more than 40% of their income in housing. And 4% of the population is in severe housing deprivation, meaning that they lived in an overcrowded house and with poor amenities. So we not only monitor the situation, but we have a number of initiatives that we put forward. Let me mention 3 of them. First, the European Platform on Combating Homelessness that was announced in our action plan, and that will be officially launched in a presidency event organized by the Portuguese. And the platform will gather evidence, good practices to support member states, cities, and service providers in combating homelessness. This is an important initiative for a commissioner and for the Portuguese presidency. The other initiative I wanted to mention, the second one, is the renovation wave, because it's a very good example of how the climate goals and the social goals of Europe can be intertwined and complementary. We know, of course, that energy is an environmental issue, but also a social issue. 35 million of persons are at risk of energy poverty, meaning that they cannot afford to heat properly their house. And the renovation wave aims at least double the annual energy renovation rate of residential and non-residential buildings by 2030. And in addition to that, the Commission also adopted a recommendation on energy poverty and is supporting the EU Energy Observatory, which provide guidance and examples on how to tackle energy poverty. Another initiative will be the Affordable Housing Initiative to promote the smart neighboring approach in 100 districts. And as a first step, the Commission will set up a European partnership bringing construction, social housing, and public authorities together, and to support the piloting of this approach. The third and last point I wanted to stress is that we want housing to be energy efficient, to be affordable, to be healthy, but also to be inclusive and accessible for all, meaning that it should cater the needs of a diverse population and cater the needs of older people and of people with disabilities. And we launched recently in March a new strategy for persons with disabilities, and we will launch a new accessible resource center with resource and expertise, pooling resource and expertise on accessibility in various domains, including for the built environment. So we hope with this initiative to promote not only affordable but also inclusive and accessible housing. And with this, I'll give back the floor over screen.
The screen, indeed, yes. Yes, a whole raft of initiatives there, Lucy. Thanks a lot. And then I think we're going to jump for a taste of something a little bit different. And Alessandro Rancati from the JRC has agreed to join us. Of course, it's quite early days from the new European Bauhaus, but of course, when Housing Europe saw that right at the highest level of EU policy, we are talking about how we live together, we felt that this was very much related to the work we are doing on the ground. I think as Bent Madsen kicked off today's session, the local housing providers really feel they're at the coalface of the challenges being faced at the highest level, but also the opportunities to turn those neighborhoods into, as he said, hubs of opportunity. So we're very much enthusiastic, and we want to work together and to try to make sure that the new European Bauhaus also addresses helps to potentially to address those challenges that Alice outlined and that are really at the forefront of citizens' minds. I know we have some work to do on that, Alessandro, but maybe just give us a little bit of an introduction into where you are now and how you think we can work together on that.
Very good. Thanks a lot. Yes, and I would start by saying by being placed at the GRC, GRC doesn't have a direct role of policy. We advise and we create the conditions for our colleagues to perform at the best of their ability, if we can. So that's our effort. And I think that I would frame the intervention in that frame. So we are now on top of it performing what we call a design phase. So we're getting insights from essentially the public, the different stakeholders, but also we're connecting with the work of our colleagues in the different DGs. And you see already that there's a lot of, and you probably see also there's a lot of overlaps, for example, with the Affordable Housing Initiative. So what Lucy was mentioning before. The only thing I want to say is that we have in our tagline, beautiful, sustainable together. And that together is how we translate, in a certain sense, a lot of different dimensions that have been touched today, from the affordability. So the idea that no one should be left behind on the access to housing, but also another dimensions that it may be less tangible, but I would say equally important, which is the dimension of the relationships. We're seeing already some of the cities that we're having conversation with that start to think of their plan for human relationships as important as the plan for the actual infrastructure, and so giving importance to that dimensions. And so the idea of building places where we are together has also a component, not just at such a high level, but really, how can we build communities together as persons and responsible in our own neighborhoods. There is, I would say, one of the topics that is emerging in this first phase is also the importance of co-designing the cities. So cities are more and more interested in how citizens can be part of the designing of the city, and that in a certain sense also helps to address the real problems and the key problems that cities may have, and at all different levels. So this is something that we see as an input. What I would suggest practically to be connected to what we do in this first phase of the project is really to include the findings of the research into our systems, so go through our website, but also open a conversation. So I also would suggest really warmly Housing Europe to become a partner, so apply so that we can work a bit together also on detailing a little bit more. But also all the participants of today, we have a section where we collect the challenges. And so make sure that all these challenges are in the system. They are highlighted, because that's where then we can bring all of the findings and all the results to the attention of all our colleagues and say, well, these are the topics that are coming up. We obviously not only focus on challenges, because one of the maybe novelty of the project is also that it's a project of hope, like the president is mentioning, and so we are focusing a lot on what is already out there that is working and then can be used as an example. Okay, so make sure you don't only focus, or we don't only focus on the challenges, but we bring also all the thousands of different initiatives, solutions, and even attempts or experiments that are relevant, because that's our knowledge base in a certain sense, and it's way more than knowledge because it's applied. So that's my hopefully requested to have really a varied base of information, so that we can then make sense of it together.
Thanks a lot, Dawson, for that quick intro. I think the focus indeed on co-creation and working with citizens, it's really a crucial one here, and not to be taken lightly. And on that point, I give the word for a quick reaction back to Bent Madsen. Maybe Bent, you could just give us a little bit of reaction to the panel so far, your reaction to the report and the next steps, and then in the meantime, people are popping in some questions through the Q&A and the chat. Bent, welcome back.
Thank you, Soka. Yes, I have many, and thank you for everything, all that is said by the panelists. I have a lot of reactions, and I'm very excited. I think there was very good messages. And first of all, I will congratulate the Portuguese presidency of the achievements and the approval of the social pillars, which is very, very important, and the very important messages from the presidency, which I think was very, very positive. Many important things I noted here. First of all, inclusive cities, looking at the possibilities of finance, how we can allow financial support, looking at the state aid rules, and a general support, which I think to many of the recommendations in the state of housing, which is very, very positive. And I have here 5 pages of notes from the panelists, and I'll not go through them, of course. And also thank you to Sparentag. I think many very important points, and also about the green taxonomy. And I will just say about the green taxonomy, we are very excited about the green taxonomy. Also in my own country, Denmark, we are in fact going through all our 20% of the housing mass, which is social housing, and to declare the energy standards for all that, of all the housing, of the whole housing sector, and make a link to the finance. And what I will say now is that when you look at the green taxonomy, sometimes you can make the demand so high that you will only have a very little part of the social housing stock to conform with the very high demands. And then you will create, you try to create a market for maybe green bonds and green finance. But if the demands are too high, you will not have enough liquidity. And when we look at the demands right now, even in the the Danish housing sector, which is very well maintained. I can say it's a very little part of it which conform to the proposals for the green taxonomy. Just to say that you have to level the demands of the green taxonomy so you can create a market with big sufficient liquidity. And to Declan and the DG ECFIN, I think it's good to hear the focus on affordability and the issue on affordability. And also, as an economist, when you said about the expansionary fiscal policy of the high percentage of the GDP, it's very exciting to look into, and it's very important that the means there are used to create lasting benefits, not just, as it also was said by one of the panelists, to mitigate the social things right now, but also to have lasting effects in the longer run, and indeed to create some structural changes. And to DG employment, thank you for many of the good points, and also on the inclusive and the diverse cities and the platform to combat homelessness. When I look at my own country in Denmark, we try, in fact, to eradicate homelessness using the social housing sector. In one of our cities, Odense, we use the waiting list to the social housing sector and take those of our homes with the lowest rents and dedicate them to homeless people, and we have systematically social support for it. So it's indeed possible to eradicate homelessness if, and we should, if we really are going to do it. And the last thing about the last panelist about Bauhaus, I think it's a very good approach. What I hear here is to take measures which is already working and collect the solutions. It's a kind of a hub of solutions, not to say that you are not that we're not going to develop new solutions, but also, in fact, to collect the good solutions which we have all over Europe. So many thanks, a lot of inspirations and a lot of notes on my papers, but I think I will stop now. So we only have to 12 o'clock.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bent. Indeed, you give a good sort of summary there of the different complexity and the different strands of EU policy that indeed have an impact on the work on the ground for the social housing providers. Yeah, let's just take a couple of the questions that have come through from participants. So we have a question from the city of Barcelona, from the housing agency of the city, Edward Capre. And so he talks about, indeed, so it's an aspect of this multi-level governance. So he talks about the next generation funds and directs this question to Kim, indeed. And the fact that the funds indeed are nationally managed, as it will be indeed the national governments distributing the funds, and just asks in a way, what should be the European advocacy strategy on that as the cities work together with their national authorities?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Well, first of all, I think it's very important that, there's a lot of pressure on national governments to include it in the plans. So if you haven't already, and you still think that you have the time, put pressure on your national government. What we can do from an EU level is, first of all, spread more awareness about the fact that you can actually invest in housing and in combating the housing crisis through this fund. And secondly, it's very important that, and I also see it as an important role for me as a member of the European Parliament to scrutinize, the national plans and try to make sure that when they are being, discussed by the European Commission and and that we then, you know, make sure that we really put more pressure also on the Commission to give some better recommendations if perhaps combating the housing crisis is forgotten in the plans.
Thanks. Actually, I should mention on the 10th and 11th of May, we will run a renovation summit, and there we will try to indeed take stock of whether or not the projects are managing to meet the projects on the ground, whether the plans. So obviously, this remains to be seen, and we've heard from Declan that work is in progress there as well. Thanks, Kim. So there's also a question coming through, I would say to Declan. Not directly related to housing, but related to the recovery plans. Again, mentioning making sure that cities have a strong say over project and receive their fair share, but also related to potential corruption and how that will be checked.
Yeah, okay. So I think, yeah, on the first part of the question, I mean, the regulation itself calls upon governments when they're preparing their recovery resilience plans to engage in dialogue with social partners and with the various levels of government. And we certainly follow up on that in the context of our dialogue with the member states on the design of their recovery resilience plans. I mean, that being said, we are ultimately reliant upon the governments themselves, you know, undertaking it both in the sense of the spirit as well as the letter of the requirements of the regulation. Now, I know I have to say it's worked well in some countries. In other countries, perhaps more effort is needed. As regards the sort of control and risk of corruption and that, there's kind of several layers of protection which are foreseen in the regulation. First, member states themselves, when they submit plans, are obliged to set out in detail the processes and procedures which they will put in place to undertake audits, ex post controls, and how they intend to deliver upon the sound financial management of EU resources. And this runs through the EU budget, so that the financial regulation requirements apply. And now in doing that, we have encouraged member states to rely wherever possible upon the kind of audit systems and mechanisms which have been put in place for the cohesion funds. So not to reinvent the wheel if it's not necessary. Many member states will do that. Some others will sort of adjust it a little bit. And then finally, every time that a member state requests a disbursement under the facility, which they're entitled to do twice a year, they are obliged as part of that to submit a report indicating the controls and verifications which they have been used. So that's how we will address it. Now, I think here it is nonetheless important to point to, let's say, a little bit of tension in the design of this system. On the one hand, it's a recovery instrument. It's designed to, and by that we need to get the funds out into our economies, support jobs, support the recovery now, this year, next year, the year after next, not 5 years from now. And that means we have to move quickly. It means, we cannot have the full system of funding approach that we have under the structural funds. It means we're relying to some extent upon projects which were in the pipeline or were being prepared. At the same time, it's supposed to be a resilience instrument and delivering genuine, hopefully transformational change on green and digital. And I hear what colleagues are saying. They just don't want a one-off splurge. They want to genuine progress to be made. And obviously that takes a little bit more time, and one would like to develop this. So we've got to get the balance right between moving quickly without cutting too many corners at the same time. People need to be realistic about, if we want the funds to go out quickly, we will, it cannot be according to the same standards that we would have, say, under the structural funds. How are we trying to deliver that? Maybe just 2 points and I'll close that. I mean, it's not just this is not a funding cow on its own, right? It's not just about investments. And we've been very, very clear to member states there needs to be two other additional elements. One is there need to be investments accompanied with reforms. Now, That can mean different things, but in the area of housing, it could mean changes to various regulations, which building codes that apply on energy efficiency or whatever it would be, removing unnecessary impediments to permits or whatever it takes. So reforms accompanying investments. The second is that there's a very, very heavy focus also on flanking and supporting measures. If we're going to have a deep renovation of the stock of public buildings and private residential properties, we need adequate labor supply of people with the genuine skills. So a lot of emphasis is going on the spending in these areas are really about training, vocational training, ensuring that there's the supply of the skilled labor we need to undertake this work. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Declan. Of course, this reform aspect is crucial, obviously, if the investment is going to have the desired effects. I had one follow-up question that has come through indeed from our head of policy, my colleague Julien, and it's in relation indeed to this more long-term impact. And he asks particularly, is after the end of the escape clause, will there be still enough room for member states to invest sufficiently in social housing? So quite a straightforward question about indeed the resilience of the emergency measures that have been taken.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, the general escape clause. The Commission, and it's supported, I think, by the finance ministers, will remain in place for some time. And I think there's a general consensus not to withdraw fiscal supports too early and avoid the mistakes of the past. Quite how long that will be remains to be seen. Certainly, it will remain in force this year, and we will see. We did indicate, the Commission outlined a communication on this a few weeks ago, where we said maybe the best indicator to look at is to look at the actual level of output and compare it to the pre-COVID level. On the basis of our current forecast, that would suggest something like the end of 2022 for the EU on average. Some member states before, so some after. We have put on hold a little bit the review of our fiscal framework. We will be restarting that. The communication doesn't pinpoint when, but probably it will be hopefully in the second half of the year. The economic trajectory in front of us should be a little bit clearer. Now, one element of the review indeed concerns how we treat public investment. We did, and this was what we had proposed this. We had, let's say, analyzed this before the COVID, where we clearly showed that one of the consequences of previous fiscal consolidations was public investment in general was the first to be cut. And that would probably include social housing. So it is something that will be definitely part of the review. There's also a lot of discussion amongst economists on whether some adjustment is needed there, also in the context of extremely low interest rates and what that implies for sustainability of debt. So it's definitely something to be part of the discussion. At the same time, one has to recognize that public finances have taken a tremendous beating. Public debt levels have gone up 15 to 20 percentage points in the last year. Okay, not a big issue when interest rates are so low, but can one count on market conditions being so benign over the very long term? That's very much an open question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this will be indeed a growing concern, and I think, as emphasised by the OECD, they only predict a growing demand for new construction of social and affordable housing. So I think this is one of the proposals that Bent has made. So this need for ongoing exchange on the mid to long term at the European Council level to ensure that we don't have the fall off in the required investment, which will result in a fall off in new construction and renovation. So I think it's a problem that will need ongoing collaboration. And we have a question coming through, one for Lucy Davoine and one for Alessandro. So to Lucy, coming through from Greece, from Gabriel Amistis. So he is a specific question around the ESF and the next multi-annual financial framework, 2021 to 2027. So what he's missing a little bit is in the fields of employment, education, social inclusion, and health. there's what he's saying, there's no specific reference to access to housing. And how, he's asking, how should the EU and national governments address this lack of linking up? So that's to Lucy, and one to Alessandro. So indeed, it's referring to the stress on green spaces, and that was indeed stressed by Kim. I mean, obviously, Alicia has outlined in her report the feedback coming up from the ground about the radical impact on health and on mental health and well-being of inadequate housing. But Kim also referred to the need for more green spaces, and he is. We have a question about whether the Bauhaus will also address this. So maybe Lucy, if you have any reaction to that about this integrated approach in the ESF Plus.
I think the Commission is promoted an integrated approach where we combine both investment in building environment, in infrastructure on the one hand, and also social services, social support, especially for the most vulnerable groups, Roma communities or poor people, of course. So, and where the ESF Plus funding is very important. So ESF Plus is supposed to support the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights, which includes Principle 19 on housing. So the ESF should also be a support in this area. And I hear the concern that some links might be missing there, but that's why we have, I think, a number of policy initiatives where we will connect the dots, like the platform on combating homelessness and another series of policy initiatives, and really building community of practices and seeing how we can ensure integrated approach, actually, indeed, between the different strands of funding and forms of investment, being social investment or investment in infrastructure. Well, I hope I'm sure like the question.
Continue the conversation as well. Alessandro, do you want to address quickly the question around green spaces?
Yes, well, the good news is that we are seeing a lot of requests of new green spaces. Only also work on creating our own green spaces. We know that across Europe there are a lot of initiatives run and promoted by citizens to even use public spaces and turn them into production of food or any, let's say, other excuse in a certain sense to create relationships. So that's something that we're seeing a lot. One remark that I would like to make is that we didn't have so much interventions and example and participation from people like you or people who are following today. So those who are expert, who are 100% into the topics of inclusiveness, of affordability, etc., etc. So there is of course the attention, because it's part of the project, but if this attention is supported by all the views of all of you, then it let's say it gets a level of attention that it's and also a level of detail, no? and a level of insights that without your support we cannot have. So again, a strong recommendation to bring your voice forward, to bring your examples forward, and to bring your challenges into light, so that they can be integral part of the conversation and enrich the sense making.
Thanks a lot. An open invitation there. With that, I think we've come to the end of our panel. Before we move on again to our Mentimeter, to give our audience another chance to feed into this process today, and then we will run into the conclusion. So I would really like to thank all the panelists. I think we see that by its nature, housing it's a very multidisciplinary issue, and we see that. So that the macroeconomic picture is extremely relevant. Issues like the Stability and Growth Pact is impacting members every day, but just as there are initiatives coming through the European Social Fund on more inclusive housing, we see the Bauhaus having an impact. So we really, more and more, we see the social housing and the housing question in general really has been catapulted up to the highest echelons of EU policy, and we will be very happy to work together to make sure that we turn this into something also positive for citizens, and we can help to offset some of the inequalities and also the new inequalities as a result of this ongoing urgency and ongoing challenge being faced. So I look forward to the continuing conversation, and thank you very much for taking time out of your schedules today. So I think we will give Diana back the floor to let her run the last part of the Mentimeter before I conclude the session. Is that fine for you, Diana?
Yes, perfect. Yes. So what we can do now, well, we have another 2 questions left. And as I promised this time, we're ending on a little bit more positive note. And also, we still have around 100 people on Zoom, but we also have quite a few people following live on YouTube. So chat has been quite full, but let's just maybe try to reach out to more of you. So if I try to share my screen again. All right, so you should be able to see it. And then we are going back to menti.com, and the code remains the same, but in case some of you joined a little bit later, it is 67. No, I see not. People start voting, but super. So the code is 67 41 46 50. And here we are asking something a bit more specific about proposed EU measures and initiatives that you'll find in Chapter 5 of the State of Housing report. What of the proposed EU measures and initiatives could bring us closer to a better state of housing? There are 5 options there. The lower the number, the less you agree, the higher the number, you fully support that. So a high-level group on post-COVID affordable housing, so that we have member states and housing ministers and the responsible for housing who actually speak to each other and exchange experience, but also they share that with relevant stakeholders. Increased investment in social and affordable housing, the only one that has a total of 10. Modernizing state aid rules, that also came in the beginning of the discussion. Improving the EU semester indicators, and truly social EU green transition. So it's great to see that none is really to the very left line of the screen. But I totally see that increased investment in social and affordable housing is leading, followed by a truly social EU green transition seen by the EU Green Deal, and with that mentioning, of course, the renovation wave, the affordable housing initiative, the new European Bauhaus, all major initiatives where public, cooperative, and social housing providers can and will and are willing to play a key role. Okay, I see that the participation slowly decreases, but I think that's very much understandable because it's a Friday and we still very much we're very grateful to see a high number joining us today. And a last question, which maybe it's my favorite because it's this nice word clouds that then we can build together, and really it allows us to grasp your ideas of what is your vision of next generation neighborhoods. So we heard Ben speaking about green spaces, about accessibility to everybody financially, but also culturally, making these new neighborhoods basically living hubs where people can thrive, where they have access to jobs. So yeah, I actually forgot to mention that we can also use icons. So a lot of greenery, that's how I read it. Okay, looking forward to see a little bit more suggestions, or maybe many things that were already said. Social playgrounds. Yeah. Community is something that usually comes, all comes all at once. So I'll try to go through it. Prosperous neighborhoods, open green space, affordable, comes up very, very clearly. Shared, with young people, with good infrastructure, with common areas. The 15-minute city comes up as an idea to feel healthy, inclusive, cooperative, well mixed. So indeed, very good to add to that. It's changing quite quickly, but I'm trying, I'm doing my best. Okay, hub for welfare and growth. Social playgrounds, a lot of parks. So really, I think the affordable, green, mixed, inclusive comes up. And just a month ago, we did another event on the social green transition and on the role of the sector. And I'm very glad to see that. I'm sure that the audience is quite different. Maybe some people have joined the two events, but still with two audiences, with around, again, more than 100 people, we see that the same words are coming up. And it's maybe also a good moment to say that there is our Homes Are Deal initiative that Housing Europe is leading on, where we try to exactly touch upon on one of the main initiatives, mostly the affordable housing initiative, where we have started our series with different stakeholders, not only from the sector, but also externally. So these ones are looking for expert to feature in its 5th episode. So feel free to drop us a line if you want to be part of it, or if you want to see what we've done before. And yeah, and also feel free to just look at our Homes Are Ideal, because affordable, green, mixed, inclusive, it's actually one of the highlights also there. And I think that's from me. Ready for conclusions. Sorka.
Thanks a lot, Diana. Yes, just to conclude, I think I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and look forward to working with all of the network over the next weeks and months to make sure we get that. We capitalize on Kim's excellent report. We capitalize also on the action plan produced by the Urban Agenda Housing Partnership, and we turn those policy proposals into something that really makes a difference for people. I think Alice's report has really showed the stark reality of the underinvestment in social affordable housing over the last decades. This needs to be reversed. And we have heard from Declan the work on the recovery plans. However, it must be acknowledged that in many member states that this will not meet the needs. So the supply side needs a radical boost. The other side, we see the ongoing impact of financialization in the sector. We see the ongoing impact of capital cities of short-term platforms, which we're seeing a blip in that. Short-term letting platforms, I should say, we're seeing a blip in that at the moment, but we don't know how that will play out in the near future, as highlighted by the State of Housing report. So on both sides, so on the supply side and on the financialization, we're seeing an erosion of that buffer that is so needed, so that the roof over people's heads, which is so needed to lead a productive lifestyle. We are seeing ongoing increases in homelessness, as outlined by our colleagues on a daily basis at Faenza. So I think the reality is that there are positive measures being taken, positive initiatives, and at last a recognition of the problem at European level. But whether or not we are doing enough to turn this around in time to offset growing inequalities really remains to be seen. So I look very much forward to continuing this conversation. We will have some follow-up events on going in more in depth into the issues raised, the policy issues raised, and the thematic issues raised in the state of housing. We will also be going more into, in our partnership with the UN Habitat and UNECE Housing and Management Committee. So Declan Costello mentioned the whole issue of reform. And as we know, many regions, cities and countries are indeed looking at how they can reform their approach to housing to really put people at the center and increase the supply of affordable and social housing. And it is no complex issue, as it brings in a multiple of different factors on the land policy, on the regulation of the private market, on the on financing, on how to handle climate change in an affordable way. And on the 14th of April, together with those partners, we will be bringing together policies which have had a resounding success, particularly on the financing of sustainable, inclusive housing systems. So we look forward to that. Again, we will have a renovation summit on the 10th and 11th of May, which will in a way have a stock take on to what extent the financing from the recovery plans is reaching local projects, local renovation projects, and local new construction projects, together with the International Union of Tenants and many other stakeholders. So we look forward to continue this conversation, for you to join our events and to join and us working together on your events. So the conversation is not over, and we look forward to the continuation. And I will wrap it up there. Thanks a lot to all of you for joining, and have a good weekend. Maybe Ben, you would like to say goodbye?
Yes, and thank you very much to the participants. And I know the panelist has left us, but thank you very much to the panelists, and also thank you very much to the Secretariat. We are in a demanding period right now, but I think today we received very, very promising signals and a promising recognition of the situation, and also, as you said, promising measures. So I think we finished the day on a very positive note, and which is very, very important. So we are looking into a period where we have a recovery period after COVID-19, but we are also looking into a period where we are making lasting and structural changes if we are good and do it together and do our best together. So on this positive note, I will say thank you to all of you, and have a nice weekend when you come to that.